panel on policy advocacy, I would like to introduce Gary Roda from the Commonwealth Secretariat, who will introduce the rest of the panel.
Thank you for having us here. My name is Gary Roda, and I'm a Human Rights Officer at the Commonwealth Secretariat in London. And we are a voluntary organization of 54 Commonwealth member countries from across the world, many of whom are represented here. And we come together on a number of issues like trade, climate change, and human rights and democracy. So, the reason why we are here is because for a number of reasons, chief among them being the vast majority of countries which still criminalize consensual same-sex conduct come from the Commonwealth, and the colonial history of the Commonwealth and the export of homophobia, transphobia, and biphobia is integral to the work that we do. So that is basically just an introduction of what the Commonwealth is, and I'm going to just introduce and call upon the panel to join me on the stage. First, we have the Deputy Minister of Justice, John Jeffrey of South Africa. We have Felicity Wasis from the Department of Justice for Namibia. We have Malusi Simelane from eSwatini and the Commonwealth Equality Network. We have Jessica Bwila from Malawi. And Monica Tabengwa from the UNDP. I was a little bit apprehensive and nervous about what my comments would be this morning and yesterday. And then I sat with my colleague Justin, who's right in front of here, and I looked at the screen and I heard Miriam Makeba's Aluta Continua play, and I thought, oh, okay, thank you. Thank you for giving me the message. I see it, I receive it. And then I saw the screen, and Neville constantly throughout the days this week pointed out to the curves on the screen. And it reminded me that progress is not a linear process. It's back and forward, it's one step forward, two steps back, etc., etc. So that process is constantly moving, constantly changing, and we need to locate ourselves within that and try and figure out what, as part of the reinvention process, the end stage, how do we involve ourselves, how do we engage with different and new mechanisms, or mechanisms that we wouldn't necessarily engage with, how we engage now in those processes. So as a short introduction, I would like to just show a short video of the head of human rights, Dr. Shavana Haythornthwaite, who is in Mauritius at the moment, just as a short introduction.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues, I'm pleased to say a few words to open this discussion. I apologise that it had to be virtually, but I really hope to join you in person next time. First of all, let me extend my gratitude to Neville and the team at the Other Foundation for this very kind invitation to join Kopano and for their commitment to advancing equality. I would also like to warmly thank the other panelists for joining this important conversation. The Commonwealth Charter enshrines equality and non-discrimination amongst our core values and principles. The Commonwealth is committed to equality and respect for the protection and promotion of civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights for all without discrimination on any grounds as the foundation of peaceful, just, and stable societies. The Commonwealth Charter affirms our complete opposition to discrimination in all its forms. And simply put, discrimination has no place in the modern Commonwealth. In combating discrimination, we continue to build the capacities of national institutions, such as national human rights institutions, and to assist in creating national spaces for dialogue. Recent years have seen encouraging developments for LGBTI persons as their ability to fully participate in society is increasingly protected in law, Seychelles and Botswana being two recent examples from Southern Africa. In other parts of the world, however, discriminatory laws are retained, and there is rising antagonism towards the LGBTI community, which continues to suffer from discrimination by multiple actors in various forms and various fora. This discrimination is buttressed when society is viewed as some people who are us, and by implication, others who are somehow separate. Such a vision of society is inconsistent with Commonwealth values of equality, non-discrimination, and respect for diversity. Othering disadvantaged individuals and communities promotes their exclusion, reinforces their vulnerability, and exposes them to more abuse and demonization. To combat this phenomenon, we need support, we need dialogue, we need respect, celebration of diversity, and recognition of human rights for everybody. This is why Kopano is so important. COVID-19 continues to loom over all that we do. The adverse rights consequences of the pandemic are absolutely well known. The pandemic and responses to it collided with entrenched economic, social, and cultural inequalities, exacerbating vulnerability, exclusion, and exposure to harm or violence, especially amongst vulnerable and marginalized groups. Whilst COVID set us back, it also provides an opportunity to reset, to recommit to human rights, to strengthen the inclusion of those left behind, and to demonstrate solidarity. Our motivation for joining Kopano lies in its objectives, aligning with and reinforcing our support to states for a common future which is fairer, more sustainable, more secure, and more prosperous. This future cannot be common without being inherently inclusive, and we have to respect the dignity and equality of all citizens in the Commonwealth family. There will be many challenges, but we are in it for the long haul. We look forward to collaborating with each of the states and organisations on this panel throughout this journey to ensure that diversity is not just tolerated, but fully respected and celebrated. Thank you so much.
So I'm originally from Cape Town, and but now work and live in London for the Commonwealth Secretariat, as I've mentioned. And when I return to South Africa and I return to Southern Africa and I return to these spaces, I usually suffer from a bit of imposter syndrome, thinking, oh goodness, am I good enough? Am I supposed to be here? Are they going to listen to me? Do I have something positive to say, etc.? And I think that imposter syndrome resonates with a lot of other people as well in other organizations, because everyone here is in some form or some manner a human rights defender, speaking up and promoting the rights of individuals based on sexual orientation, gender identity, expression, and sex characteristics. And in that vein, we invited the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders to deliver some remarks. She couldn't be here in person, but she did include a video.
Hello, everyone. I'm really delighted to be with you today, albeit remotely, and I hope that someday I might be able to meet some of you in person. As many of you know, my mandate works to protect human rights defenders wherever they are at risk. It's a global mandate with a broad scope. And so I choose to prioritise cases of human rights defenders who are most in danger. And among them, as you well know, are defenders of the rights of LGBTI persons. And that is why it is a priority for my mandate. For fighting discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity, LGBTI defenders are targeted not only for what they do, but for who they are, and also for who they're perceived to be. Soggy human rights defenders are at risk everywhere in the world. The criminalization of same-sex relations or gender-affirming treatments in many African countries severely restricts and stigmatizes their activities there. Many of these laws, as you know, all too well were left by colonial powers. I have heard from defenders of soggy rights in Africa about how culture, religion and social standards of behaviour impede their work. These attitudes contribute to discrimination and violence and the murder of defenders. Police often don't take threats seriously, don't investigate violations, and sometimes perpetuate the attacks themselves. The pandemic revealed the true vulnerability of many minorities and marginalised groups around the world who suffered disproportionately from measures introduced to combat the virus. LGBT defenders often couldn't leave their homes to help those in imminent danger. There are organisations which struggle at the best of times to get funding were in many places forced to pause or stop their work. But in many ways, in the response to COVID, strangely, states showed what they're truly capable of. Human rights defenders saw states mobilise resources in a way that they never witnessed before. In trying to tackle the COVID virus, states achieved in a matter of months what HIV/AIDS activists had been advocating for years and years. There are no more excuses for sluggish action. Human rights defenders are doing astounding work to combat growing discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. At the end of March, I joined a panel with Kane Youngman from Botswana, who shared human rights defenders' remarkable, patient and calculated, successful attempts ultimately at decriminalising homosexuality there. And last month, I published an interview with Sandrine Julien from Collective Arc-en-Ciel, Mauritius. In the face of attacks and death threats, she talked about how persistence and building allies has led to an ever more visible, ever more confident and accepted LGBTI community. Building and maintaining networks on community, national and international levels is vital to success. International support can sometimes increase pressure on authorities, reduce risks associated with human rights work, or boost a sense of solidarity. Of course, it can also lead to reprisals. But whenever you think it would be helpful, know that my mandate is ready to respond and you can count on my support. The main tool at my disposal is writing what they call communications. These are formal letters written to governments when I have concern about a human rights defender who is at risk, and I take a people-centred approach, raising individual cases. I rely on people like you and the organisations that you run in order to be made aware of these situations. If you don't tell me, I won't have any idea of what's going on and no way of knowing what to do. If you would like to raise the case of a human rights defender at risk, you can write by email to capital letters OHCHR dash or hyphen defenders@un.org, including as much information as possible about the current situation. I'll review the complaint with my team and follow up for more information if necessary. It is really important that you get the consent from the victim to allow me to raise the case with the government, and as I said, my mandate is human rights defenders, so it's only to do with LGBTI defenders advocating for the rights of LGBTI people. I also write 2 thematic reports a year, one to the Human Rights Council in March and one for the General Assembly in October. My last one was on human rights defenders combating corruption. That was to the Council. And before that, to the General Assembly last year, it was on the long-term detention of human rights defenders. And my previous two reports were, one was setting out my priorities to the General Assembly, and the one last March 2021 was on killings of human rights defenders and the threats that can precede them, not always, but in some cases. I meet with states as well, through the permanent missions, usually in Geneva, where I raise my concerns directly with them and try to persuade them to do the right thing and take action on the human rights defender. Success is not easy, as you know. And there's no quick fix to the enormous challenges that we face. But hope is the fuel that energizes all human rights defenders, and it's impossible to defeat. It doesn't guarantee success, but without it, nothing is possible. I really wish you well, and I just want to say that you can count on my unwavering support. Thank you very much.
We know that human rights defenders across the world face an increasing smaller space in which to operate, whether that be because of violence or because of constraining laws like registration or funding, etc. So back to the panel here today. Deputy Minister John Jeffrey, by way of introduction, can you just set out to the audience what it is that the Department of Justice is doing in the promotion and protection of the rights of LGBTI people?
The main, I think, issue is that we have a national task team on, at this stage, violence against LGBTIQ plus people, which was set up in 2013. It's a joint group between government and civil society. And was set up specifically to look at violence and when there were a lot of attacks and killings and rapes of lesbians. We want to expand that, or that has a national intervention strategy which was recently reviewed. We want to expand it into dealing not just with violence against LGBTI people, but to basically generally deal with the whole issue of the rights of LGBTI people, particularly to equality. So involving a whole lot of other government departments in that process as well. We want to elevate it to a deputy minister level. We want to take it through cabinet where that can be, so that there's buy-in from cabinet. Sorry, one other point I should have mentioned is currently with the NTT there is a rapid response team, which again also includes government and civil society reps tracking cases involving violence against LGBTI people. That's the broader summary, but in South Africa, as you'd know, we have the equality clause in the Constitution, specifically that people can't be discriminated against on the basis of their sexual orientation, but any other issue can also be taken up. And there are then equality courts which are at every level of court. So your local magistrates court would have an equality court, or could turn into an equality court, regional court, high court, where if there's a complaint that people's right to equality has been adversely affected, they can take the case there. We are then also involving, and this is involved with, and this is sort of less the Department of Justice, but we've been involved on the issues of or the rights of transgender and intersex people. There was a big conference at the end of last year, and the issues on the table are basically for Home Affairs, the question of in a South African ID, one of the numbers on your ID determines your gender. 0 to 4 is one gender, 5 to 9 is the other. And Home Affairs are looking at redoing that with two options. One, to take off the top two, that would be 9 and 8 and 9, and make them gender neutral numbers, or simply to do away with the gender marker altogether. They seem to be more in favor at this stage. I think it's allowed for public comment. They seem to be more in favor of the 2 numbers for gender-neutral people. The concern that they've got is that if you don't have a gender marker, how you're going to advance the rights of women, which is a big issue for South Africa, although we don't have a racial ID number or number in our ID, and we're still able to proceed with issues of affirmative action for people on the basis of color. So yeah, sorry if I went on a bit, but those are sort of some of the things. Thanks.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. Malusi.
Like when you did the introduction, you said you feel like an imposter sometimes. So I can empathize because I'm no longer leading the organization, and the new executive director is in the room, who is a queer woman, because I believe the future is female. But I still retain my role as founding director in a non-executive role. So what we do as Eswatini sexual and gender minorities is advocate for the equality and recognition of queer rights. Many will know in the room that there's been extensive work that has been done in terms of key populations, bringing services to marginalized groups like men who have sex with men, transgender persons, and female sex workers. But what we decided in 2019 was that it's about time that we took the conversation a step further and start discussing LGBTQ rights as they are, and not focusing on the sexual activities that happens in the bedroom, and therefore healthcare access, because we believe as queer persons we exist in every sphere. So of course the government refused us registration, which we litigated, and the judgment, many might know, came out at the end of April, where the courts affirmed our rights but still refused us registration. And the reason they refused us registration, which takes me to the Commonwealth Equality Network, which we work closely with, is because of the colonial legacy of homophobia, where it is said that in the country, of course, like many countries in the region, there is still the criminalization of same-sex acts, but not necessarily the identity of queer persons. So how we work then, on the issue of the judgment and the registration of our organization, I'm happy to announce that we are actually appealing that judgment by the High Court in Eswatini. So we look forward to see how that conversation goes. But in terms of the TSEN work, and my sister Linda, who's actually from Namibia, I'm sure she's in the room right now, will know that the way that we work as TSEN is that we bring together the voices of queer persons from across the Commonwealth. As you rightly said, the Commonwealth is a family of countries which in itself the Commonwealth wants to promote understanding and goodwill amongst these countries which are friendly. So what we do then as the Commonwealth Equality Network, as a network of LGBTQ organizations, is we lobby governments first at national level but also at Commonwealth level. And just to share my experience, even though I have not been a part of the TSEN processes for a while now, my sister Linda in the room again will speak more, I'm sure, when we get to the interaction. But my experience with TSEN was in 2018 when we held CHOGM in London, where we had a conversation with the Committee of the Whole. So the Committee of the Whole is the highest making decision of the Commonwealth, just below the heads of government, where before each CHOGM happens, they are able to bring in civil society organizations to talk about priority issues and stakeholders to talk about priority issues that could be elevated. And I was the first queer activist to come to the space, thanks to TSEN, and talk about the violence that we face as queer persons because of the criminalization and because of the legacy of homophobia. So the work continues, and I'm happy that TSEN has managed to speak to many governments, like the Australian governments, the Canadian governments, which are mostly white, yes, but I think it's important for us as African governments within the Commonwealth to leverage on the economic advancements of these other countries so that they support us, particularly because the legacy of homophobia, it's not about pointing fingers, but we all know how it happened. And again, in 2018, we were able to push former Prime Minister Theresa May to actually offer an apology from the government of the United Kingdom. And ever since, we have been able to see quite a bit of money going into work in these African or Pacific islands or Caribbean countries that actually still suffer the legacy of homophobia.
Thank you, Malusi. So if you have any further questions, Malusi, Linda, and some other organizations will also be able to answer any questions, and what the benefits are of joining the Commonwealth Equality Network, and how you can leverage those spaces too.
The good thing is Cabinet allowed the Minister to table it in Parliament. So the minister, I think, is planning to table that report in Cabinet. And this is the report through debate in Parliament that will eventually open doors for more debate and eventually lead to maybe perhaps decriminalizing sodomy or coming up with sodomy-related laws. Because when you look at the legislative and the political landscape of Namibia, which influences LGBTI rights in Namibia, is that sometimes there will be homophobic remarks on a political level, and such represent kind of hate speech. So what we try to do is we've also come up with a hate speech bill in the ministry, which we intend to, or the Ombudsman's office will intend to take forward and hopefully have a more open debate. Because in the Namibian sense, let me just say, there are some wins for us, because in 2021, the High Court has ruled that there was two children born by surrogacy, to a Namibian national and a Mexican. So the Home Affairs refused to give the child citizenship, and then they went to court, and then they won the case. So the child became a citizen by descent, which is a win. In another case, they applied for a residency permit based on marriage. But then the argument was, because the marriage is not recognized in Namibia, the permit could not be granted. But the court, what the court did is, it referred the application back to the ministry to reconsider. So I see there are many, many wins. But coming back to what we as a ministry are doing is, or especially me as the person responsible for making of laws, I really try to influence judicial thinking and lawmaking in every space I get. Most of the times I'll get invited to speak at the Parliament, for example. So what I will do is I would always say, in the Bible, you see there is a commandment that says, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife. And then I would say, but if the wife last after the other woman, that it will be prohibited if you look at the Bible in the literal sense. So, and I don't really, I just speak openly about them, because my goal is to evoke thinking and basically to allow our political leaders to rethink their stance. The same I do through my writing, which is on academia.edu. I try to influence judicial writing, judicial thought processes also, in the recently published Supreme Court book in Namibia, where, because some of our judges will say something like, in the 1994 Liz Frank case, the judge said that the Namibian society tends to be very conservative. And he based that argument on, because the president made a statement that homosexuality is evil, and no one in Parliament said anything against it. So he based his judgment on what the president said. But we have seen movement with the 2021 cases that our judges are becoming a bit more, moving from conservatism to liberalism. So in a nutshell, that's what we are really, I think we are moving in the right direction. There is more open dialogue, free press, and these are all environments that allow the LGBTI debate to be openly debated and to evoke more, or to change mindsets of how we see things. Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Monica, in our session on Tuesday, we discussed, or it was mentioned, that the United Nations and these international multilateral organizations are often viewed as these high-level, far away, we see you, but we don't know how to interact with you institutions, and even their agencies, like UNDP. What opportunities are there? What is it that UNDP does, and how can civil society organizations and human rights defenders interact or engage with your office?
Good morning. Thank you, Gary. My name is Monica Tabengwa. I work for UNDP. I am from Botswana. There has been talk, since yesterday about reinvention. And it is about how we need to co-create new ways to drive our movement forward. And our panel this morning is about reinventing our work with policymakers. So I'll just give you a brief synopsis of what the UN development system is. What is it, and why you might want to work with it, and how we can collectively reinvent the relationship between the activists here, activists anywhere, NGOs, and the UN. So institutionally, it is a collection of about 17 different affiliated funds, programs, and organizations, all of which are governed by governments around the world. The functions range from providing a forum for dialogue, decision-making and norm setting, to research, advocacy, policy advice, capacity building, technical assistance, and humanitarian aid. While there are many different institutions within the UN development system, 5 organizations are by far the largest. You all know UNICEF, UNDP, where I'm working, WHO, the World Food Program, and the UNHCR. You heard the first speaker who was speaking from there. So from 2020 to 2024, the UNDS has focused overwhelmingly on sustainable development goals, the SDGs as they are commonly known. And this is about mainstreaming them into our planning, our work, and our reporting. The UN is also supporting countries to accelerate the implementation and follow-up and review of the 2030 agenda, including by addressing the gaps and challenges identified by what has been called voluntary national reviews. Now, the relevance of the UN, basically. The last 2 weeks, we have been busy with IDAHOT, or IDAHOBIT, the International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, and Transphobia. This is a day that is observed each year as the anniversary of the day in 1992 when the World Health Organization declassified homosexuality as a mental illness. This was the first time that a UN organization took an official policy decision that explicitly supported equality and inclusion for at least some LGBTI plus persons. Although since 1989, WHO technical staff had already been calling on countries to decriminalize homosexual behavior in order to support particularly the response to HIV. So 2 years later, in 1994, the United Nations Human Rights Committee decided in a case in Tasmania, Australia, that criminalization was in violation of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which is a key treaty in international law. UNAIDS was established in 1995. It continued to echo WHO's previous calls for decriminalization. But of course, it declined to name a lead agency on LGBTI issues. And that didn't happen until 2008, when UNDP successfully advocated to take on that role. Like WHO and UNAIDS before, the first work on LGBT issues was framed in terms of HIV, but UNDP quite quickly moved to advocate for rights and inclusion of LGBTI plus issues more broadly, most visibly with the establishment of a regional program 10 years ago. Some of you might know it as Being LGBTI plus in Asia Pacific. Another program followed, similar program followed in in the Caribbean and in Africa. Now, here in Africa, we have established more work on LGBTI issues. And through the program that I work for, which is the Inclusive Governance Initiative, we focus on bringing together decision makers from governments and states with community members to facilitate the development, implementation, and oversight of LGBTI inclusive policies, strategies, and laws. Among others, that means we work with parliamentarians, and my colleague is around. He's going to be handing out a flyer that will help you see what kind of work we have been doing with parliamentarians. So over the past 10 years, one other UN organization has been working, stepped up on this work, advocacy work, and that's the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights. That said, virtually the entire UN development system is now officially involved in supporting equality for LGBTI community. For instance, just yesterday, the ILO, the International Labour Office, had a high-level launch event of their latest policy guidance focused on LGBTI in the workplace. Let me emphasize that there is often a gap between these policy pronouncements at the UN headquarters and the reality of UN organizations working in each country. However, these UN policies, guidelines, statements are at the very least tools that we can use in our advocacy, and they can be very useful and powerful when countries sign on to regional and international human rights treaties. So, just to conclude, I have already mentioned the whole of the UN development system, which gives support to countries to achieve the SDGs and the Agenda 2030. There are two particularly important and striking features of these goals and this agenda. Firstly, countries have committed to leave no one behind and to focus their development efforts on the most marginalized. Leave no one behind, is just as it says. It means leaving no one behind without any qualification. That includes us. That includes everyone in this room. Every queer and trans person who's particularly marginalized and excluded from development effort. And secondly, even though they do not mention the word intersectionality, the SDGs are all about intersectional action. There has been some discussion during the week about the connection between LGBTI issues, homelessness, and the legacy of apartheid in Cape Town. Yesterday we heard about LGBTI issues intersecting with climate justice. All of these issues and more are part of the SDGs, and most importantly, there is an explicit recognition that progress is one area. In one area requires progress in the other. So they work together. The denial of one affects the denial of the other. And that rights and development for everyone depends on rights and development for the most marginalized.
Yeah,
okay.
Please.
So, coming back to reinvention, what does this all mean? So, not all of you or not all of us or should engage with the UN development system or collaborate with us as we try to support and influence countries. But many of you are already doing so, and more of you could usefully get involved as part of a big picture strategy in advancing LGBTI inclusive governance, law, and policy. But I believe the real invention is linked to the SDGs. At a minimum, it is essential that many of us are heard and involved in community, country, and regional discussions about SDG-related strategies and why and how LGBT issues and populations in our diversity must be included. It is also essential that LGBTI plus people are present in and participate in discussions of the broader SDG agenda, including things like climate justice, housing, HIV, mental health, gender equality, poverty alleviation, etc., etc. These issues affect all of us, and all of us must be part of the solution. As we join broader movements for social and economic environmental justice, we must convince activists to join our movement as well. So this is what reinvention we are talking about today. Bringing LGBTI people and the issues and the issues that involve us or that involve them into the broader SDG agenda, and to make sure that the broader SDG actors bring us and our issues along as well. So we are talking about government decision makers, Minister John Jeffrey, that they in their plan, they bring us along as well. And us as IGI, that is the Inclusive Governance Initiative, and UNDP, and the broader UN system, we are very keen to partner and work with different in-country organizations and activists to make sure that the implementation, the monitoring of progress is meaningful for LGBTI persons.
Thank you, Monica. And last but not least, Jesse, you spoke very eloquently earlier in the week about the role of parliamentarians and how civil society organizations and human rights defenders can engage with parliamentarians as a collective, as a deliberative body, but also individual parliamentarians and their responsibility towards their constituency. Can you speak to the audience about the role of parliamentarians in advancing the discussion and what opportunities there are for civil society organizations to engage with parliamentarians?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think if someone was to ask what is the role of parliamentarians in talking to civil society, I think it's when you look at an MP, somebody who makes it to parliament, this is someone who, whether we like it or not, commands support and is looked up to. And the question is, what are they going to use the support that they have? And for me, it has been an opportunity to grassroots the LGBTIQ question, an opportunity for this to be, because I think often there is a problem of rushing to legislate, and I think legislation, what we've seen is it is not a panacea. We need to grow this from the ground. And a member of parliament actually can legislate, can also make sure that laws are made, and can also oversight. The three roles that the member of parliament can do. But, much more important, I think, the thing that I look forward to is our budgets. When we say we are not running gender-responsive budgeting, the issue is simple. Our budgets are not made for LGBTIQ people. We are making budgets as if human rights is a game of numbers, as if human rights is about who is the majority. When LGBTIQ people pay taxes, if we make this question a tax justice issue, if we make this question a liberation struggle issue, I think much more important, if we make it a political question, we are going somewhere. I'm saying that at least even for women, when we were saying, we want rights, you can talk about it. But unless you make it a political question, something that you actually say, look, there will be no rest until this goal is achieved. And you actually are having a movement that looks at that. So a member of parliament, the way, I think it's about how do you use the political capital that you have in order to educate, because the ignorance out there is just amazing. Simple things like how many animals are actually have same-sex sex. it's amazing how, I was watching this other movie the other day, and just a little child was explaining to dolphins, this and that, and this and that, and someone said, wow, I wasn't aware. Parliamentarians have the power to impact curricula, not only to make sure that the curricula is depatriarchalized, decolonized, but actually made to be friendly and knowledgeable on LGBTIQ. Ministries of education are the most closed up, the most, on comprehensive child reproductive health rights. People are teaching out there, denying that students are having sex, yet we all know it's happening. But the curricula does not want to accept there's this ostrich approach. No, everybody, they are all operating from the colonial thing of a woman should close her legs and everybody else must, if any sex happens, it's the fault of the woman. The fact that these people might just want, are going to have to do it at a certain time, I think the ostrich approach is not helping us. So a member of parliament could look at the education benefits, could look at health. Right now, if you look at COVID-19, the way we have reacted was not inclusive at all. Nobody bothered, even when we're talking about packages of helping people to survive when they were under lockdown. There was no one who said, you're going to get lubricants here, you're going to get whatever. No. For some reason, people thought they had locked everything, including our private parts, which is not true. Yeah, so that's the impression I got. It's almost like contraceptives and lubricants or whatever. No, they've also been locked out. They are also under lockdown. And I'm wondering how people will learn, even if they were just to look at their Bible, that if there's one thing that's problematic, it's telling a person not to have sex. That is just a sheer waste of time. They will have it as fast as you've told them not to do it. So actually not to avail them safety and what can make them have, And members of parliament are key, because almost every country that I meet here, we are 17 countries here, I can challenge that everybody has signed into ICPD. We are signatories. The kind of politics being done in the SADC region globally, people have no problems committing. They commit very well. If you talk about the Malawi government, they will commit even as you are rushing to the bus. Mm-hmm. But for them to actually deliver, the minute they meet, a lot of the politics we are doing is populist. They say what will bring in many votes, but you see, the truth of the matter is, populist politics is killing people. Malawi has seen a huge number of suicides, a huge number of mental health problems. And members of parliament, these are issues that they need to look at. I'm going to actually get towards my summary by saying, I think for members of parliament, it's about changing party politics. The problem we are having is political parties reward populist people. They are run as a boys' club, and anybody who rocks that boys' club is thrown out faster than they can spell their name. So I think the more we are, and when I talk about parliament, trust me, I'm not just talking about the major parliament. I'm much more interested at the necessary level, the young parliamentarians, because at least I had the privilege to serve at SADC Parliamentary Forum. And whilst we were there, I'm sorry, without being offensive, but listening to a country like Zambia, I think it took me lots of courage to not just go out there, buy a gun and shoot some people. Because it was so annoying to hear people use this word of, we are a what? A Christian nation. I mean, I was like, you guys are more Christian than Christ himself. You know, and I do not understand this Christ business that is so discriminatory and that is, you know, I'll say being a member of parliament, and for me, I was told point blank, you, at the rate you're going to come back. I said to them, it's fine. I might not come back, but another day I'll come back. The reason is simple. The only way, I keep saying this, to change this is not to get out of the kitchen. I know it's hot. I know it is very painful. But members of parliament, right starting from the young ones, if we can start interesting and equipping our LGBTIQ community, and that can help us. Members of parliament control budgets. You can talk all you want here, but if it is not budgeted for, it is not going to be done. It has to be made into law. It has to be implemented, and somebody has to say, let's oversight. That's why, for me, MPs, they also have a way that they can network. They can work with each other. We have SAF-AIDS, we have UNDP, we have these different groups. I think what people must understand is, yes, politics is ugly, but unfortunately, that's where the power, that's where the resources that decide your life reside. And I know many people say it will never change. My point to you is nobody actually thought. I'll give you an example of Malawi, that Malawi would actually remove a sitting government. But we did it. Poor as we are, nobody thought colonialism, the way it had settled down. We went to Robben Island the other day. I do not think Robert Sobukwe thought he knew what he was. He was sure of it, but he had the power of belief and strength and resilience, which ended him reinventing. We cannot reinvent from outside. We cannot reinvent by being spectators. We have to be at the center, not only part, but at the center. And nobody should speak for the LGBTIQ community. You should speak for yourself, even if it's the last thing that you do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jesse. I am very cognizant of time, so I'm going to open up the floor to the audience. If you have any questions, please make your way to the mics. In the interim, Deputy Minister Jeffrey, earlier in the week they mentioned that South Africa is seen as because the meeting is held here, Kopano is held in South Africa, it's seen as this paragon of LGBTI rights, and it's this land of opportunity for LGBTI people. There's also this natural inclination to look towards South Africa on international and regional stage to promote the rights of LGBTI people. What are the opportunities in your mind for LGBTI people to engage with the South African government at an international level? What is the role of South Africa at an international level, be it at the UN or, in my case, at the Commonwealth Secretariat and those different forums?
More of a tougher question. Maybe just let me first say that, yes, South Africa may be a bit better than other countries in the region on LGBTI rights, but there's still a number of issues, as I'm sure that the South Africans in the audience will attest to. But as far as South Africa's role internationally in the region, one, it's a bit difficult for me. We sort of stay in our lanes, so I'm not I'm not a Deputy Minister of International Relations. But two, generally you will find that there's only two issues that we'll criticize internationally on a regular basis, and that would be what we see as continued anti-colonial struggles and that would be the struggle of the Palestinian people and the people in the Sahrawi people. So I know that there's a lot of, I'm looking at my colleague over there, looking at me, and it's if you take eSwatini, it's not just issues of LGBTI problems with the rights of LGBTI people in eSwatini, it's a whole lot of other problems. But it's an issue of, I think, one, we are not too keen to be seen as the big brother directing everybody. And two, I think it's an issue of we feel we can do better, whether we do or not is another factor. We can do better being able to engage, to negotiate, than by coming in and shouting. So yes, what happens in Zimbabwe, for example, affects us a lot in terms of, well, they were, I think, our largest trading partner at one point on the continent. It also, the economic problems causes a large influx of Zimbabweans as migrants. But the practice has been and is to try and engage. I don't know, to my colleague, if shouting at the king would have an impact. I doubt it. Well, similar, same thing. Yeah.
Thank you.
But I'm sure everybody from outside South Africa is not happy with that answer. But that's look. I think it's also an issue of lobby the South African government. So yeah.
Thank you. Someone is at the at the mic. Yes.
Hello, everyone. How are you?
Good.
So I'd like to bring up two things. There's a sense of, and as much as I'm hopeful that all of the panelists understand the concept of nothing for us without us. However, there seems to be a sense of indemnification. There's a sense of indemnification from how the us gets brought into the spaces that we have been systemically excluded from. I made this point in one of the groups that I was in about the fact that if we want queer folks to be in politics, and you made this point yourself, are they going in as queer politicians, or are they going in as politicians who happen to be of experiencing a life where the politic of their lives is queer politics? And this, I guess this question goes to not only the the representatives from South Africa, but also to the Commonwealth, because as you rightly said, there is the danger of being the elder who says you're not doing it right, because there's the fear that for every time you say you're not doing it right, you've got so many other flaws that could be pointed at. So you might say to another country, you're not doing well on LGBTQ rights, but then that country might come back and say, but your citizens are violating our citizens. And you then go back and say, well, your citizens run to us for refuge. And it's like, well, then why are you not a safe space? Right, so this sense of, again, the Commonwealth as the reason a lot of us do the work we do is because of that journey on a ship that brought the system to the countries that we are now in. So the inherited trauma, the inherited labor of liberation, which then the Commonwealth is also very cautious about saying, well, we can't just go in and say, please can we get back our constitutions that we gave you? So I guess the question here is, how do we move beyond the sense of indemnification? Because we've seen INGOs take the role of trying to get people in, but INGOs are, as has been stated throughout the week, now causing internal rifts where you are finding people going to the funding to survive as opposed to the funding serving their prosperity? I hope the question was clear.
Yeah, yes.
All right.
That was very clear.
Thank you.
Yes. I'm going to answer that briefly, but is that another question or?
Yeah, I have a question. And don't worry, it's not long, I don't speak much. So I come from Zambia, the Christian nation. And the honors is, personally, I know that we have like 3 members of parliament that are queer in Zambia. And the conversation has been how we should have politicians that are queer. We already have those, but they're not speaking for us. So does this mean that we should get into politics and be the people that speak, or should we encourage the ones that are already there to speak for us? Because if they're already there in this new government and they're not speaking, then that's a sign that maybe they feel it's a danger to speak. And then there's a person like me who's already openly queer and I get into politics. The way Zambia is made, they're going to drag me. And that might just maybe kill my spirit. So I don't know. Are we supposed to groom the younger ones to get into politics, or should we start as openly queer people to get into politics? How does this work? Thank you.
Okay, and then there's one more question over there.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the presentation this morning. Mine is not a question, but it's a comment and a request from our Deputy Minister of Justice. I am a parent, a mother to all these children that are here. They are my children. I'm also a mother of a lesbian girl. I've been taking care of the LGBTQI persons as my children from different countries in my home, and presently we just set up a shelter in Gauteng. But specifically, Deputy Minister, my request is for the department to focus at especially the smaller towns, the courts in smaller towns. I'll mention specifically Charlestown in KZN. The investigating officers there just don't care of cases, especially of LGBTQI. You drive from Gauteng for 3 to 4 hours and you get there, there's no court, there's nothing. When the investigating officer called the previous day to say the case is tomorrow, and actually pressurizes the victim to say, why don't you drop this case because you are far away? And the victim is far away because he's being victimized by the very perpetrators that actually left them for dead in assaulting them. And continuously when the case has to take place, the investigators is either not there, there's no electricity, there's always computers are not working, and you have to drive back. And the department, from my knowledge, has to pay for transport for victims who go for cases. We've been there for more than 10 times. Every time from Charlestown, you have to drive to Newcastle. Newcastle, they tell you a story, and nothing happens. And this is so frustrating. And at the same time, we will not allow these cases to be dropped. And families of these victims, in the meantime, are threatened by the families of the perpetrators to actually drop the cases. So I also want to say thanks to the entity, because some of these cases are actually continuing because we had to communicate and request assistance from the entity, and they're happening, but still there is these blockages. And so if the department can focus, because those people are just relaxed in those small towns and they have no fear, it's them. and it's just about them. And LGBTQI, like they're not human beings, or they step children in the country or in our legal system. So this is my humble request that please, please, please.
And then, is that Linda? One, yeah. Okay, should we then just do a quick answer session and then we take the next set of questions? Okay, so the first question, I also, again, calling on Linda, is long time ago, I don't know if she remembered, we spoke about the issue of inclusion and what that means and what we are including LGBTI people in. And the system that we are including them in is still designed in a way that is meant to exclude them. So do we change from the outside? Do we change from the inside? What is this inclusion that we talk about, particularly at international levels and international forums like the Commonwealth Secretariat, like the UN, etc. So I'm going to ask Malusi and then Monica, just quickly, what is your experience of, what is your version of inclusion of LGBTI in spaces at internet? And you've just come back from the US, so you know what that is like. How do we include LGBTI people in spaces that are built and designed in a way to exclude them?
I really was hoping that I do not get to answer that because I personally believe it's always context specific, and it matters how you perceive inclusion to be for you first as an individual, second as a demography within the queer space, because we're a very diverse community as queer, so it would be unfair for me to say queer inclusion looks this way or that way, because even as a queer community, inclusion for me as a cis gay man is different for someone who identifies differently within the queer community. But I think fundamentally it's important that our voices are not just being heard, but our voices are leading the cause. I think my sister was speaking about being front and center of the change that we want to see. So I wouldn't be fair to anyone if I were to say inclusion looks like me arguing that this is not inclusion. Instead, I would argue that inclusion for me looks like actually taking action upon my hands and saying, if they're not including me, I'm going to work towards creating spaces that are going to include me. That is precisely why, for instance, we started an organization in eSwatini called eSwatini Sexual and Gender Minorities, because we were seeing the wonderful work that through PEPFAR and USAID is going into, making sure that there's healthcare for, not just healthcare, but there's HIV services for some of the queer community, but we decided that for us to be included in everything, we have to do something, because it won't help us arguing that, no, but this whole key population thing does not include everyone. So that's why I really did not want to answer the question, because it gets polarized when you talk about what inclusion looks like, because of the very fact that we as a queer community are diverse, and therefore we perceive things differently.
Yeah. Monica, you have experience as well at various forums, African Commission, UNDP. How do we ensure that it's true inclusion, that we don't only just take up space, but when we get there, we create the space for future human rights defenders?
Yeah, thank you, Gary. Just continuing from Melusi, I think it's important, as former MP mentioned, to be there, to be present, and speak for yourself. Own that narrative, and also to understand the system that you're dealing with. So if you're going into whether it's the African Commission or the Human Rights Council, you need to know how this institution works. That means understanding its structures, understanding how decisions are made. Who are the most important people? Where are the entry points? even to a point where you study even the individuals within that institution. Just giving you an example, when we first started trying to integrate LGBTI issues into the commission, we realized very quickly that just people not wanting to even talk to us was high. People would literally run away. And so what we did was to go through all the commissioners and understand what are their very specific issues that they want to bring up in the commission. They had various things that they wanted. Some were personal, some were, from wherever they came from. And once you understand that, you know how to approach that person. You know how to talk, you know how to speak their language. And you also need to go back and do research because you are representing, or all of you need to bring information from your different contexts. We are different, we experience life differently. We experience even the discrimination and the oppression. We experience it differently. So we need to bring those lived realities and state exactly, write it down. This is research that people can read in the various languages of the African Commission of the UN and understand that in Botswana, this is the experience of lesbian women. This is the experience of trans persons. In Zimbabwe, and so on and so forth. And that's information that people cannot rubbish because it's supported by lived experiences. And so I think that's really, really what made it very, for us to be able to open the door, for people to listen and have that dialogue. And by the time we then presented the commission with a resolution to say, people are violated every day. Violence happens in the streets, in the homes, everywhere. And it's because of who you are, who you love, how you identify, how you express yourself, how people see and perceive you, that you are violated as you are. And by the time we brought that, we had done enough with that evidence. We had done enough talking to individual commissioners that we were able to push forward Resolution 275. And that's a success that came about. It takes time. That's the other thing. I think you have to be patient. You have to really, really breathe. You can't be angry. Anger can serve you sometimes, but I think in this instance, you have to really be patient and speak with different institutions to bring this. So it really is a long-time investment. I also wanted to respond to the question on Zambia, on parliamentarians, whether, do we groom little parliamentarians, or do we and grow them up, or do we go to the ones that exist who are queer but don't want to talk about this? I mean, we all know not everybody is an activist, right? There are some of us who set ourselves out and say, I want to speak out about my experience and the experience of others. I want this to be heard, and that's your choice. And I think it's okay, But some others don't speak because of fear, or maybe they don't know, right? So then we need to give them the capacity. And I think MPs have a difficult time in the sense that they still have to serve, constituencies where it's difficult, the opposition is strong, there's culture, there's religion, there's all kinds of things that pushing them in another way. And they are afraid that if they were to come out in support, or come out themselves personally, that would make them lose elections. And so, we have to work on tools to help them, do this work. And we've been working on a handbook for parliamentarians. And this handbook has examples, has stories from African voices, stories of success, stories of struggle. The law reform that happened in Mozambique, in Angola, that came through Parliament. How did Parliament do that? The successes with litigation through Botswana and a few others. And, just really to give MPs the knowledge that it can happen, and you can talk to other MPs, and this is how to deal with stereotypes. You know, there's a whole section in the handbook that deals with opposition or stereotypes, like when they say homosexuality is an African. And it's a stereotype, we know this is rubbish. But how does an MP deal with someone heckling him or her or them from the podium? And so we need to give MPs the strength and the tools to be able to kind of handle all of these difficult questions. And this handbook, we have a flyer. Hopefully, it's somewhere lying down. If you pick it up, there's a link that you can click on. It's useful for everyone, and not just for MPs. I think doing this work and trying to influence policymakers.
Thank you, Monica.
Okay.
Kopano standing over there. Before we take the next round, are we still good for time? Oh, okay. So just if everyone could just then jot down their questions, and then we can, I'll then hand them over to the particular speaker.
I mean, I've been standing for 10
Linda,
minutes
I believe.
It's impossible. I cannot go sit now. I must at least speak. I've been standing for 10 minutes.
Okay, 1 minute.
The three of you this side, all of you come from privileged offices. The three of you that side are our allies. The three of you are my family from the queer movement. The conversation we are having is about dealing with and how we work with public policy makers. And I ask myself that these people are generally perceived as opponents, because policy makers are the ones that keep us out of their doors. And I speak from my country's experience, where we sit in the spaces, but we are irrelevant. And I make a practical example for my country, because if I look at what you just shared, Monica, you guys are working on inclusive governance. You are working on inclusive government, but you're not working with us as a movement. And I find these multilateral institutions that are advancing our issues, not taking us along. You've been living the reality. And I feel all of you that live the reality with us on the ground, when you have a suit on, you forget where you are coming from. And when you're in that office, the language is even different, where you are not able to raise consciousness. And I find it challenging when we interpret this discussion in terms of not asking us what our realities are with policymakers and where we are coming from as citizens in our countries, because it is a challenge. We've known this for years, that they don't want to talk to us, but we also known it for years that they need our votes. How do you marry those things? So I think it's important for us to really state the position of policymakers, to be very clear about what our strategy is with them, because we condone their rubbish, we condone their nonsense, and we allow them to abuse us. And when you guys sit in those privileged offices that you can go sit alone in a 5-man show, you don't give us the opportunity to be part of that system, so that they're able to hear. And that is why the issue of human rights defenders movement is dying in this movement of ours. And that's a huge challenge, because you cannot work at the UN and the African Commission or at the Commonwealth without bringing human rights defenders forth. This whole week, we haven't touched anything on human rights defenders. And we are all human rights defenders in this space, and the amount of violations we're experiencing are very high. I just have one question for you, Felicity. You can always entertain me outside then, since there's no time. Our country, we've been reporting 2016 and 2021 at the African Commission and at the UN UPR reports. I'm so happy you guys finally have 2 lines in the report regarding LGBT, because all the years is that we do not use the sodomy law to criminalize people. But finally, you guys have an extra line now to say, this law is not used to criminalize, but we must first have a discussion with the church and the cultural groups to be able to affirm whether you can allow us to live in this country. I'm curious to know where the additional extended sentence came in a circular state that requires us to be able to be inclusive. Yet at the same time, you have this progressive sodomy repeal suggestion to recommendations to court, to Parliament, to be able to move that around. So I find a bit of a contradiction in the work that your office is doing, because you are subjecting my rights on the basis of churches and cultural group, and not on the basis of human rights. And that becomes a problem, because now, if that Christian church leader doesn't like me and my muffiness, it becomes a problem. So I want to know, you sitting in that office, what are you doing for us to be able to make sure that we have a seat around the table, but also to make those leaders understand? Because I trained your policymakers, 90 parliamentarians. I was supposed to train for 1 hour. It took me 4 hours because they were asking me as a lesbian whether I reach an orgasm. And I couldn't understand whether they really wanted to sandwich me in between. But it's a problem and it's a challenge. So I'm curious to know how we move as a country, and especially this discussion on policymakers. And there's not been investment in the movement around policymaker advocacy. We just put them in as elements of substance, even though they're the change agents. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda. Okay, as we wrap up, I just want to thank the panelists for participating. Oh.
Yes, I'm sorry I had to say this. And the reason I'm saying this is because there's no other opportunity to engage on this. I don't know if the audience, the leadership sitting there, especially our minister or deputy minister, knows about Unati Weber, who was killed last week, about Nontogozo Mutloung, a lesbian who was killed in Val, and another lesbian who died this morning. And the reason I'm saying this, or asking you to allow me to talk about it, is there could never be another opportunity to share on our reality as the LGBTI in South Africa or in Africa in general. I want to agree with Omama about what's happening in the ground, because few engages on criminal cases on daily basis of lesbians that are killed. We go to court each time there's an LGBTI case sitting, and some of them drag for 5 years. And in those 5 years, some of those cases disappear. And in their disappearance, people or humans are denied their human rights of getting the correct punishment for perpetrators. We cannot keep quiet. And we engaged last year with the criminal justice system, Minister, and in our conversation there, what came out is there's no database that speaks to the hate crimes. If there is, it's sparse, which is controlled by the police. And where we are currently as the LGBTI community is we are developing an app that will register all the concerns as they happen. We are going to make sure that all the cases of hate crimes are registered and that you are aware of it, and that you go about ensuring that the cases are handled within the time that all the cases are treated in South Africa. And out of that, we are also going to make sure that we go and report to the Human Rights Commission, to the Commonwealth Equality, to any platform that is willing to listen to the realities and the impact of issues that are faced by the LGBT. And out of that, I have a possibility, I have probably an assumption that we will have the 180,439 policies of South Africa trained on SOGI, on what it is, who are they, where are they, and how to relate to them in the most human manner. Not just that, the whole criminal justice system, the health system, and in all other places of exclusion. And I'm hoping that we're able to take you on it to engage you further. And I'm hoping that this is done by all the communities in the world, because our plight is not highlighted or communicated openly. And thank you for the opportunity to engage you on it.
Thank you, Felice. So thank you to all the panelists for a wonderful session. I'm sure there'll be more space later on for engagement. So if you have further questions, please ask any one of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Gary. Thanks the Commonwealth Secretariat and UNDP and all the panelists.